I don't know how my mother did it. And before I give any talk, it is so important for me to always pause and say, I am only who I am in this world today because of my mother. Any mistakes I've made, and it's a long list, are all mine. Anything I've done that is worth talking about or is notable is all because of her. My mother taught me what it meant to stand for others, to not close a blind eye, to not let fear dictate you. And even when we had nothing and we went to food banks and got food stamps and we slept in cars and there was nothing, my mother brought me to the Free Public Library and said, read. And that is what I did, and I read all the time. And reading and learning and being able to have a worldview made my life possible, as well as the social safety nets that for some reason today are not getting a good name. That if you are a single mom and you need welfare and support, I'm hearing Americans say not so pleasant things about those people, and I want to say if it were not for those safety nets, I would not be here today. And when you stand for women and children, you say what the character of your community is. And so I'm so grateful to the people who saw my mother and my sisters and I, and to the scholarships that allowed my sisters and I to be the first in our family to go to college. So early on, I found activism, because a lot of things pissed me off. It just made me so mad I couldn't believe it. And I remember watching something on TV. I was 10 years old, and it was something on the news, and it seemed unfair and unjust to me, and I'm complaining about it. And my mother, in her wisdom, said, well, that's all well and good, but what exactly are you going to do about it? And I started doing, and activism is what I found, and I loved it. And I loved that people could get together and speak up. And I loved that people didn't like often what my viewpoints and opinions were, but they would say, you still say them, because that's what makes us America. And that was a gift for me, to be able to have my voice and what I believed in and who I stood for. And so I moved along in my activism, and I loved it, and I didn't love dealing with money. I didn't like talking about money. I knew I could walk in rooms and kind of pass as somebody who came from money because of what I look like and because I'm well-read and well-spoken. And I spent a lot of time pretending that I didn't come from a poor background because I was afraid that I'd be found out and kicked out. So I hid it. And I felt like an imposter, and I felt overwhelmed. And I remember a very wise soul once said to me, well, I said, I'm just afraid people are going to find out where I came from, and then I won't be allowed in all of these rooms of great philanthropists that I found myself in. And she said to me, well, why don't you just tell everyone and there's nothing left to find out? And so I just started to tell my story about my life, and it turns out more people than I thought had a similar story or a story that they had never shared. And it was one of the times where I thought and got that telling the truth and giving voice could do so much for others. I moved to Seattle after I went to college. I kind of wanted a fresh start and go to a new place, and I had a great job working for an AIDS service organization, and as those of you know, sometimes working in social services, you get paid this little bitty much for what you're doing. And I'm on my way to work one day, and Seattle has all of these outdoor magazine newsstands, which is kind of odd because it rains all the time there, so I don't want to stand outside and read a magazine in Seattle. But on my way to work, walking past them, and I see the covers of Time and Newsweek magazine, and on the covers are the faces of Bosnian Muslim women screaming. And I stopped in my tracks, and I bought these two publications, and I went to my office and I read those stories cover to cover. And to this day, I'm so grateful to the journalists who broke that story, because there were a lot of people who did not want folks to know what was happening to women in Europe. And they told those stories. And I couldn't believe it. You know, I was a history major, and I studied war and genocide, and I remember thinking things right, around World War II and Nazis. I remember thinking, well, I don't understand, why didn't anybody do anything? If they knew this was happening, why didn't anybody do anything? And I'm sitting there realizing this is my generation's concentration camp. I have no idea what to do. What do you do? I made what, $20,000 a year at my job? I was pretty jazzed if I paid rent on time. I didn't know anyone. Turns out I could not call Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright. They would not be calling me back. I didn't know anybody with money. I thought, well, what do you do? And I thought, so good people don't stand still. Good people just often don't know what to do. But I felt like I had been sucker punched. I didn't understand how at the same time that I was getting up, going to my job, getting pizza with friends, going to the movies, just having a good life, that these women were being dragged out of their homes and that 200,000 women were forcibly raped. I did not know what I was supposed to do with that. And so I leaned into the words of my mother who said, when in doubt, learn everything you can. And I read everything. And I went to everything. Anybody who was talking about it was a lecture, I went. Why is this happening in Europe now? Why? Why are people doing this to women? Why is this happening? And I learned. And when people say half of life is showing up, that turns out to have some truth to it. And I met a professor at the University of Washington, and she said, I'm going to go volunteer in the Balkans this fall and help women and children. Do you want to go with me? And I said yes. And I started, this was in the day, by the way, of fax machines. Yeah, remember fax machines with roll paper? Yeah, that was really awesome technology, because then it would bunch up and you go, no, I can't read it with the ink piling on. But there was an organization in Bosnia that had a fax machine. And I faxed back and forth with them, and I figured out what they needed. And they needed infant formula, and they needed yarn because winter was coming, and it's cold in Bosnia in the winter. And I started gathering all of these supplies. And at the last minute, the professor I was going with could not go. And she said, so you'll have to go by yourself. And I was 23. Here's a few things that happened with that. People said to me, oh no, you can't go. You'll just get hurt, you can't go. Someone said to me, you're young and you don't know this. That's one of my favorite things to say to someone in their 20s. You're young and you don't know this. And he said, but we don't go during a conflict, Kathy, we go after. And I said, wow, so far that's working out really well for everybody. What? Someone said, is your family Eastern European? Is that why you care so much? So I would have to be related to somebody to care about their suffering. And then finally someone said to me, you know, the United Nations can't even figure out what to do. What are you going to do? And I weighed all that. And I thought, there's probably a million reasons I shouldn't go. But there was only one reason why I knew I had to. If it were me, and I was that scared and alone, I certainly hope other women would show up for me. And so I went. And under the category of my mother is such an epic rock star, remember, no cell phones, nothing, no social media, no nothing. 1993, 4. I hugged my mother goodbye and she said, if you find a phone when you get there, try and call me. And I said, I will. And she said, if I never see you again, nicely done. And that is who she is. And so I went, and I had never flown on an airplane. We didn't have any money, remember that part? So I was like, hey, what's up? So we get to Europe, and I have to take a flight to Bosnia, and it's Air Croatia. If you leave with nothing today, please don't ever fly Air Croatia. I was like, are those bolts in enough? Because I'm fine to wait if a mechanic wants to come and fix those. And I have my little backpack with all my stuff. And me and 6 Serbian businessmen on a plane, and they're just staring at me. I thought, how's it going, gentlemen? Hello? And I land in the middle of a war. And as you can well imagine, it completely changed my life. And here are the ways that it did. I, on the news and in news stories, had read about victims, and when I got there, I only met survivors. I met among the strongest people I've ever met in my life, who were experiencing the unendurable and the unthinkable, and they were still going on and getting up every day. I met kids who grew up way too fast and had no chance at any sense of innocence or childhood, and had such maturity and strength that I nearly tipped over from it. The men had been murdered, and that was part of the strategy. And so it was left in the hands of women, and I met women who had never had a 4th grade education and all of a sudden had to figure out how to do money and run things, and they did it. And here was what I was struck by. It was getting cold when I went, and I was walking around with my translator, and I said, "Where are all the homeless people?" And she looked at me and said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "How come there's no people living on the streets?" And she looked at me and said, "Why would we ever let any neighbors sleep on the street?" And things started clicking and clicking and clicking of what could be possible and what the world could look like. So I stayed for a few weeks, and I did things that in today's kind of world of how we do grant making and philanthropy, these are the deliverables. You know, people like to talk about those, but what's the outcome? What's the deliverable? What's the result? As though that's the sum total of being a humanitarian. But the things I did is I took documents that had been translated into English and made them grammatically correct. I swept floors of refugee camps. I fed people. And I suppose if a big foundation were to give me money, they'd want that report. How many people, how much food. But that was only part of the story. Because what I did and why I realized I went is I went to listen. I sat across from people who could not even believe this was happening to them. Who didn't really, they had a sense maybe a war was coming, but not fully. And this was a siege, and they were helpless. And my translator, who I gave a lot of money to so that she could translate. I remember sitting across from a man in his broken, donated wheelchair, and he had no legs, and he just told me everything, and he kept trying to remember which field he lost his legs in. And I listened, and I held his hand, and I listened, and I remember he said to me, "What's so good about this for me is you don't have a story to match it." And what I got is, if you tell someone your tragedy and then they tell you their tragedy, but what it meant to have me, who lives 6,000 miles from them, just show up. And I've been struck by that as we look at how we make a difference, that sometimes showing up and holding someone's hand is more important than what you could ever put in an annual report about how many meals were served or how many home loans were improved. That's a piece of it. It's not everything. And we're losing it a little bit in philanthropy, but don't worry, I'm on that. So I was getting ready to leave. I, had a job back home. They were kind of hoping I'd return at some point. And I knew it was unlikely I would see these folks again. It cost me some money to get there, and there's a lot that went on credit cards. And as I was getting ready to leave, I was told that the airport had been taken over by the Serbian military so that no more aid could come in, so I couldn't fly out. So I had to take a train to Austria. And my translator said, we're going to take you in the car. And there was a man who drove us around everywhere, and I always think of him because of how much he watched over me and made sure that I was safe. And for the men in the room who make sure that women are safe, I'm not sure you can know how much it means. It can be very difficult as a woman to go somewhere and hope you'll be all right. And the men who step up and make sure that somebody else doesn't harm you, it does change our life. So I was getting ready to go, and my translator said, the woman who runs this organization, it was this ad hoc group called the Women's Association of Bosnia and Herzegovina, And she said she'd very much like to come to the train with us. And I said, okay. But here's what was odd about that. Since I had been here, this woman didn't speak to me at all. I'd say good morning to her. I'd hand her Turkish coffee, which is, by the way, it turns out you're not supposed to drink the grounds at the bottom of that coffee. Hey, I was up for 3 days. Does anyone need anything else? I'm up. Can I do anything for anybody? And so we didn't really speak, and I often wondered if she wanted me there or if she felt it wasn't my place. And knowing that sometimes Americans can take over just a little bit too much, I wanted to be mindful that I was there to serve and not take over. And so we got in the car and we went to the train station, and we're waiting on the platform for the train. And the head of the organization says something to the translator, and she said to me, she wants to tell you something, and she's asked, did I translate? Is that okay? And I said, of course. And this is now some 25 years ago, and how I best remember what she told me. She said to me, oh good. No worries. Please don't worry at all. It's okay. I often think it's like a politician calling me, make her stop talking, so no, I'm kidding. So she said this to me. She said, I think I knew somehow the war was coming, but I didn't want it to be true. I'd heard from my grandparents about other wars. And she said, the day I knew is the Serbian military kicked down the door of my house, pulled my husband, my 8-year-old boy and I out on the front lawn, shot my husband, an 8-year-old boy, to death in front of me, started laughing and walked away. And she said, and I watched them walk to my neighbor's house. And I knew they were about to do the same, and there was nothing I could do. She said, we knew at that moment there's no one to call, there's no one who can protect us. She said, so I'm standing there in my front yard, and all I can remember is the last gift that my son made for me in his art class. And I went inside my house and I opened the box, and she said, you don't know this because you don't have children, but mothers, we keep boxes of everything that our children makes for us. She said, I opened the box, and on the top was this brooch that my son had made in art class. And it was different colors like blue and aquamarine, and it had silver around it and a pin. And she said, and I held it and remembered the day he gave it to me, and I was very busy that day, and I said, I love it, and I put it in the box and put it away. And she said, and I stood there holding it and realized this is the last thing that my boy will ever make for me. And we're standing on this platform, and she leans into her coat and she takes out this pin. And she places it on me and said, you are now the child that I lost. And if you can imagine what it feels like to be in that presence of humanity and love and graciousness amid the most unbearable loss you could imagine. And I got on that train and I thought to myself, I got it. This is what I do. I figure out my relationship with money, and I move it into the hands of local women so that they can change the world. Because if my mother had had resources, it might not have been so hard for us. If these good women had not been forced into something so unbearable, it might have looked a little different. And I understood that humanity was first and foremost the most critical part of all of our lives. And that if we could see one another in our humanity, free from judgment, with full compassion and love and grace, if I could ever be 1/10 of the person that that woman was, then I would have done okay. And I was in the airport last night and CNN was on. Everybody's so angry on CNN. Anybody notice that? So angry. Does anybody have anything nice to say? Anything good, anything hopeful? Do you want to say something nice about another candidate? One thing you could think of? You want to maybe not take a group of people you've never met and broad brushstroke if you think they have morals or not, even though you've never met them. And I look at all that's going on in the political landscape and I say, I don't really know what they're all doing. They seem like 5-year-olds in a sandbox to me. And then I look at all of you, and you're not on TV. And you're not on the front page of a paper, and you're not doing 7,000 tweets to get people all riled up. You're just doing the right thing every day, all the time. And that's what this work is doing the right thing every day, all the time, without fail. It's standing up for someone who other people say, you know, they should just get a job. Or, what, I worked hard for this. I pay my own house. Why isn't that person? I met a woman once who, after a book signing, I'm signing my book for her, and I said, can you tell me what you're passionate about? And she said, HIV and AIDS, and I said, that is hugely important in the United States and around the world, and thank you for doing it. And she looked at me and she's like, well, you know, not the people who caused it to themselves. And I said, oh, I actually don't know. I don't know what that means. And she said, well, you know, I feel bad for babies and transfusion victims, but not anybody else. I said, I see. And I said, so, congratulations. She said, what? I said, I'm being the only person on planet Earth who's never made a mistake. It's extraordinary. That you've always had protected sex. It's unbelievable. And I said, I haven't been that wise as you. Turns out I've made some bad choices. And I said, because of a handful of mistakes, do you think that I should be riddled with disease? And if I was, would you not help me? And she said, oh, no, not you. And I was like, okay, look at me with babies and transfusion victims. Go me. And I said, I know we just met, and I have to tell you the hardest thing in the world. What you say about other people says nothing about them and everything about you.
Amen.
And I said, I'm sorry if at one point you were raised or taught to believe that people should be punished for their mistakes and not helped and supported. And I hope that someone is more compassionate to you. So, what does it look like to create the world we know is possible? Because we all know it. You see it in glimmers every day, all the time. Every one of you so kindly welcoming me here. The kind people who invited me who had never even met me or spoken to me on the phone and said, please come speak at our 50th anniversary. The nice man who picked me up at the airport last night and said, are you hungry? Do you want me to stop and get you food before I bring you to the hotel? Because there's no food at the hotel right now. We see humanity every day, all the time. Don't let the loud, destructive, awful stomp that out of you. Just look at it and see it for what it is. I do not know what those folks are doing who just walk around raging all the time. I don't know. But I plan to take up more space than they do with a whole lot of love and humanity. Every time we fill rooms like this, we occupy space in the right way. So as we go into Christmas next week, and Merry Christmas, everybody. This is our chance to look and say, when I see humanity, what do I do? And it is in the things, I have this huge bio and it's very sweet. And I've gotten a bunch of awards and it's very nice. But it's the things I do when no one is looking that are who I really am. Keep doing those things. That's going to change a whole bunch. And I think that those small acts actually add up and they make a difference. There's no annual report or spreadsheet or pie chart in the world that can capture that moment on the train platform in Bosnia. Except it changed who I was forever and the life that I lived. So just keep being that every day. And I'll close with two quotes that are my favorites. I'm a quote person, and I'm so grateful to people who can take words and in one sentence just help grab right onto your heart. There's a great American poet by the name of June Jordan who passed away a handful of years ago from cancer, but she did so much around activism. She particularly did a lot around South African apartheid. And she said this, "And who will join in this standing up? We are the ones we have been waiting for." I want to tell you, I know all the big philanthropists, and I know them well. They don't think they have all the solutions. They're happy to give some of their money, but they know that it's really up to us. And then the second, which came as anonymous, so I'm sorry I can't credit it, and for the gentleman in the room, this is a female pronoun, but I'm sure they'll appreciate it in the same way. Be the kind of woman that when you wake in the morning and your feet hit the floor, the devil says, "Oh shoot, she's up." Thank you all very, very much.